believed, I mean, the number of gods now it's infinite, and a new god is created almost every day by some cult or other, but it used to be that. There was a belief that gods were in the trees, in the woods, in the springs, in the sea, in the clouds, and so forth. Polytheism of a kind. Then something a bit more polytheistic, like Olympus, where there was at least a location for the divine, but it was multifaceted. And then monotheism, getting it down to one. So I regard this as progress of a sort, because they're getting nearer the true figure all the time. I think it is the reason why many people do, but remember that there are two questions. Well, I better now say, lest I be accused of not having exhausted the entire subject in my first response, I better say there are at least two questions. One is this: is there a God, a creator, a prime mover, an uncaused cause, whatever you like to call it? And this was the question answered at a certain point, not very long ago in our history, by the deists, people like Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, and many others, who said that the order of the universe seemed to suggest that it couldn't just have been random, that there may have been a designer, but the designer didn't take any part in human affairs. And that, in the late 17th, early 18th centuries, was probably, late 18th, early 19th centuries, was probably a very intelligent position to hold. It was pre-Einstein, pre-Darwin, was probably as far as you were likely to get with philosophical speculation. But so believing that there might be a cause or a mover or a creator is one thing, but believing that there is a supervising, intervening entity who cares who wins the war, who cares who you sleep with and in what way, who cares what you eat and on what day, and in other words, who makes you the center of the whole cosmos, is another thing altogether. So people who say, I believe in God, I'm a deist, have all their work in front of them before they can say that they are really religious. Indicated. We are, in a way, part of an animal creation, and we share part of their material in our own makeup. I, as a mammal, never kind of doubted that I had this relationship with roundworms and other creatures. It does make short work of racism. It means racism is no longer something we have to argue with. We may have to argue about. We may be some distance from being able to completely pronounce its utter defeat, but it's over as an argument. There is no gene for race. Racism is a primitive, stupid construct made out of literally nothing. And it goes the way of creationism once you study the origins of the species properly, which we are now able to do. Or you might want to just look at the history of the meteorites that hit the Yucatan Peninsula and very nearly put an end to all life on this earth, but did not. Destroyed the dinosaurs and many, many other species, but somehow led to our emergence, pathetic, bare, forked creatures as we are, from a long period of global winter and gloom. And if that fact that can now be established from scientific inquiry doesn't strike you as enormously more impressive than any creation myth or tale ever told, I will be surprised. But then I'm surprised all the time. Faced with this extraordinary treasury of study and wonder, there are people who in effect take the truffle, unwrap it, throw the truffle away, and eat the wrapper as fast as they can. Don't bother them with Hawking or DNA or the Hubble telescope. What they want is some more astrology in their lives. The Washington Post, my hometown paper, has a horoscope column every day. It annoys me more than my New York Times, which still has that stupid all the news that's fit to print on its top left every day. I'm always trying to begin my day slightly annoyed. And it never fails, because these are the two papers that come to my house. And there are people who want to teach our children that we as a species shared the earth at the same time with stegosaurs and pterodactyls. They want this lie taught officially to children. I know I'm on slightly sensitive ground because I'm in Tennessee. And I remember that Al Gore, at a low point in, was there a low or lower or lowest point in his did say at a press conference in Tennessee that he would not himself want to assert the truth of evolution, which seemed to be an extraordinary betrayal on his part. But I'm not referring, as H.L. Mencken did, with any intention to condescend to the ill-educated or the unfortunate. What worries me is the fashion among the supposedly educated and the pseudo-intellectual and the semi-educated for matters like witchcraft or divination or cultism of various kinds, all of which can claim the sanction of faith if they wish, but look at what they're throwing away to sink themselves into this shallow morass of sentimentality and superstition. Thank you very much for coming, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Rabbi, for a very generous introduction. I don't know how I'm going to fill up 15 minutes. After all, the burden of proof is not with me. But I can probably make a... That is going to take some time, making the case. But I think I can probably make a fist of it. I prefer to argue, and I do in my book, that the belief in a supreme being or creator is actually a pernicious belief that does a great moral and intellectual damage to our poorly evolved primate species. And I'm hoping that we will, in the course of this evening, get to the point about the ill effect of religion, but I'm not going to duck the obligation imposed upon me by the motion before us, which is to give the reasons why we're so lucky as to be furnished with so little evidence for such a horrible proposition. And falsity, after all, is a subdivision of perniciousness. Religion, however, does stand, having started in that pejorative manner, does in a way stand to our credit. We are, after all, imperfectly evolved primate mammals though we are, aware of our kinship with other such creatures. We do have the gift of pattern seeking in our minds, and we will pursue this gift, often at our own expense, but at great hazard and often with great ingenuity. That has a plus side and a minus side. It often means, very often means, you'll have observed it in your own lives and those of others, that we prefer a junk explanation to no explanation at all, or a conspiracy theory to no theory. And religion takes its place in our evolution in this precise manner. It's the first and worst explanation we came up with. It's the best we could do when we didn't know we lived on a cooling planet with big fissures in its crust, when we didn't know there were microorganisms that had power over us. We didn't have dominion over them, to the contrary. When we didn't know we lived on a spherical planet, we didn't know we revolved around other spherical bodies, everything was terrifying, new, mysterious, and often lethal. It was our first attempt at philosophy in that way, first attempt at cosmology, first attempt at geography, biology, all the rest of it. A hopeless attempt belonging to the bawling, fearful, ignorant childhood of our species, but very necessary. And it possesses still the advantage of having come first. The terrible advantage over the mind and over learning that it possesses is its originality. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers, sisters, is it not rather the case that with God everything is permissible, that once a primate believes he has God on his side, that primate is capable of anything? The suicide bombing community, more or less 100% religious. The genital mutilation community, practically 100% religious. The injunctions and warrants in the Bible, in the text itself, for slavery, for genocide, inescapably right there, and acted upon, and in the name of God, by primates who thought they had God on their side. It is when people think they are God's appointed or anointed that any kind of wickedness is possible. Let me ask you, rephrase it and ask you the question in reverse. Can you, sir, or can anyone here, name a moral or ethical action or statement that could be made by a believer, a moral or ethical statement or action, made or taken, uttered, that couldn't be made or uttered or taken by me as a non-believer? You have to think quickly. No, you don't. You've got all night. I'll give you my email. There's a prize for anyone who can name me the moral action I can't commit that a believer can. I don't expect to. But if I asked you, think of a wicked action you've heard of that could only have been committed by someone who believed they had God on their side, you've already thought of it. You know, you don't have to hesitate. You just have to think of the last suicide bomber, the last genital mutilation, the last jihad, the last crusade, the last alliance between the Vatican and fascism, anything you like. And it's done.
An island. Well, where does the religious divide come from? 400 years and more in my own country of birth, of people killing each other's children, depending on what kind of Christian they were, and sending each other's children in rhetoric to hell, and making Northern Ireland the place the most remarkable in Northern Europe for unemployment, for ignorance, for poverty, and for, I would say, stupidity too. And for them now to say, maybe we might consider breaching this gap, well, I should bloody well think so. But I don't see how. If they'd listened to the atheist community in Northern Ireland, which is a real thing, and if they listen to the secular movement in Northern Ireland, which is a real thing, and I know many people who've suffered dreadfully from membership in it, not excluding being pulled out of a car by a man in a balaclava and asked, are you Catholic or Protestant? He said, I'm Jewish atheist, actually. He said, what are you, a Protestant Jewish atheist or a Catholic? You laugh. You laugh, but it's not so funny when the party of God has a gun in your ear at the same time. And that was in Britain, and still is to some extent, until recently. Rwanda, do I say?
The New York Times says your illness has actually spurred one of the most heated discussions that they can remember of belief, religion and immortality. It's almost inevitable, isn't it, when a famous atheist faces death, that this will happen?
Yes. Yes, it's an occasion, and people never tire of saying as they do. Many people write to me or email me, including perfect strangers, readers, well-wishers, sometimes former students or people who know me a little bit. They all, one way or another, make the point that, okay, I won't pray for you, don't worry, or perhaps you don't mind if I do. They all do it as if they're doing it for the first time. It's rather touching. But as I say, the arguments about immortality, the supernatural, the last things, death, judgment, heaven and hell, are or are not valid quite independently of my mental or physical state. And so there's something fishy to me in the suggestion that, okay, now that your system is breaking down, wouldn't it be a good moment for you to repudiate the convictions of a lifetime? Again, there's something about the underlying assumption there that I want to resist.
More than 20 years ago.
Here, we want to hear this story, and you've had a bunch here.
Yeah.
Are you surprised at that?
A little bit, yes. I was. But a lot of it, I know, has been to do with my stance on religion. I mean, a very large number of people have asked me, doesn't it change your attitude to the infinite, the eternal, the supernatural, and so forth? And I've said that I really don't see why it should. I've never thought of it as a particularly searching question. I mean, I spent a lot of my life deciding that there isn't any redemption, that there's no salvation, that there's no afterlife, that there's no supervising boss. If I was to tell you, well, now I've got a malignancy in my esophagus, that changes everything, you would think, I hope, that the main effect had been on my IQ. It's a complete logical non sequitur. It's nothing to do with it. So I've enjoyed taking part in that argument.